Om Sahanavavatu Sahanau Phunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Krutau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyaptatehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. So, our inquiry into Drg Drashya Viveka is going on. Let us read from verse number 1 and recap what we have done. I am reading verse number 1. Rupam drishyam lochanam druk tadrishyam druktu manasam drishyadi vrittaya sakshi drugeva natu drishyate. So, we have seen up to verse 4. Let us quickly recap it. The first verse said, Rupam Drishyam Lochanam Drug. All the objects outside are Drishya, are seen, and Lochanam, eyes, are the seer, Drishta. Then again, these eyes also become Drishya for the mind. Tad Drishyam Druktu Manasam. So, the eyes are also becoming drishya for the mind. Now, mind is the drashta or the seer. But again, drishyaha dhivrittayaha, again the mind and the modes of the mind become drishya for the drashta who is the sakshi. So, the mind, that is the modes of the mind, become drishya for the sakshi or the witness or the consciousness which is drishta. So now we assume that this sakshi also must become drishya, must become seen, drishya for another drishta, because that is what the trend is going on. Objects were drishya, lochanam, eyes were drishta. Then the eyes became drishya and the mind was the drashta. Then again the mind became drishya and sakshi or the consciousness was drashta. So we now assume that again the same consciousness also must be becoming drishya for another drishta. But the text emphatically says what? Sakshi drugeva. Sakshi is drishta only. It is not drishya. Natu drishyate. It is not seen. This is what the first verse said. Then verse number 2. What did verse number 2 said? It, as I said, it elaborated upon the first part of the first verse. That is, it elaborates how now the eyes which were drashta for the objects outside themselves become drishya for the mind. So that part is elaborated. See, now what it says, how the eyes become the drashta, that part is elaborated. नीलपीत स्थूल सूक्ष्म ह्रस्व दीर्घातिभेदतः नानाविधानि रूपाणि पश्येल्लोचनमेकधा. So this verse says that these are the different forms or the objects outside which the eyes see. What are they? Neela, Pita, Stula, Sukshma, Rasva, Dirgadi, Bhedatah, Nana Vidhani Rupani, Lochanam Pashyet. So these are the different forms which blue, yellow, gross, subtle, short, long, etc. So these are the different forms outside which eyes see. But how? Remaining ekadha, remaining changeless. So the rule is that drashta should remain changeless and it should cognize or objectify the drishya, remaining changeless from the standpoint of changelessness. The drashta objectifies the drishya. So this is shown here. Different forms are seen, but eyes remain the same. Eyes do not change with the change in the forms. It remains changeless. This is what is said here. Then now again, what happens? The eyes undergo different changes. With reference, now see, the same eyes will become drishya for the mind. So eyes are drashta, all right, but they are relative drashta. They are drashta only with reference to the objects outside. But again, the same eyes become drishya, which was drashta, now becomes drishya with reference to mind. Now let us see that. So this verse is now, verse number 3 is now showing us, I'm reading that. Andhyamandhya patutveshu netra dharmeshu chaikadha sankalpayen manashrotra tvagado yojyatamidam. So again, the eyes themselves have different states. Say, sometimes they can be blind, andhya, they can be dull, mandya, they can be sharp, patutva. So these are the different characteristics of eyes. The same eyes can be blind or it can be dull. The capacity of the eyes can be of these three types, either blind or dull or very sharp, or in the same person at a time. At one time it can be dull, then again it can slowly it can go towards blindness. At one point it is very sharp, then it can become dull. So these are the different states that eyes undergo. But the point to be noted here is all these different changes are noted or cognized by the mind. Remaining ekadha sankalpayen manaha remaining changeless cognizes these different states of the mind. So the point to be noted here is the eyes which were changeless and drashta with reference to objects themselves become drishya for the mind, and they undergo different stages or different states, but all these different characteristics of the eyes are cognized by the mind. Okay, now then the verse said Shrotra tvagado yojyatam idam. The same thing can be seen with reference to other sense objects. Which are they? Shrotra, etc. So they also, Shrotra, etc. also can be dull, blind, etc. And all of them are cognized by the mind. Then the verse number 4 said, Now the mind which is drishya, the mind which is drashta with reference to eyes, it becomes drishya with reference to consciousness. So what is the trend that is going on? Make a note that. What is the trend that is going on? Is this, that the drashya, at one point the one who is drashta becomes drishya, and again the drashta becomes drishya. So the eyes which are drashta with reference to objects becomes drishya with reference to mind. Mind which is drashta with reference to eyes become drishya for consciousness. So that is verse number 4. Kama sankalpa sandeho shraddha shraddhe dhruti tare hrir dhir bhirityeva madin bhasayatye kadachitihi. So this verse we have already seen. What does this verse say? That the mind itself is made of thoughts. Mind is a flow of thoughts. Different thoughts make up the mind. So which are the different thoughts? Kamaha, which means desire, sankalpa means doubt, sankalpa means resolve, sandeha means doubt, shraddha means faith, ashraddha means lack of faith, dhruti means fortitude, dhruti itare means lack of fortitude, rihi means sense of shame, then dihi means again fortitude or resolve, bihi means fear, etc. So all these are different thoughts of the different modes of the mind. Who cognizes them? Who illumines them? Then the text says bhasayati chitihi ekadha. Chitihi is feminine word for consciousness. See, here the women should feel good, that here the name for the consciousness is chitihi. Chitihi is a feminine word and it means consciousness. That bhasayati ekada chitihi. Chitihi remaining changeless illumines this different thoughts of the mind. Now, the trend was that which was drashta became drishya. So the eyes which were drashta with reference to objects became drishya with reference to mind. Mind which was drashta with reference to indriya, the sense perceptions, became drishya for chitihi. So now we assume that this chitihi, this consciousness also will become drishya for another consciousness. Mind, this consciousness which is drashta with reference to mind, now will become drishya for another consciousness, for second consciousness. That second consciousness will become drishya for another third consciousness. That third consciousness will become drishya for the fourth consciousness, because that is what the trend is going on. That which is drashta becomes drishya for the later one to come. But no, the very first verse stated emphatically what Sakshi Drugeva, it made a point that Sakshi is drashta only. Natu drishyate, it is never seen. Why? Let us now stop here and look into this point. Because see, you may argue or you may have a doubt that why not this consciousness, which is the drashta for the different thoughts of the mind, why does it not become drishya for second consciousness, then and then that second consciousness for another? If that is the line of thinking which we take, then what will happen? It will lead to the defect called anavastha dosha, which means what? Infinite regression, which means that we will never, as we discussed last time, in that case we will never arrive at the first consciousness, which is the drashta. Why? Because each consciousness which is drashta becomes drishya for another one, then that one becomes drishya for yet another consciousness. In that manner, if we go, then where will be the first one? Just as last time we discussed that we have our parents. Then who are the parents of this parents? Another parents. Who are the parents of that one? Another parents. In that manner if we go, then what will happen? The first parents will not be established. So there has to be a point where we have to say that these are the first parents who have not come from any other parents. They themselves are parents, first God, first creator. Otherwise, as I said, it will lead to the defect. It is logical dosha. What is that? Anavastha dosha. In Sanskrit it is called anavastha dosha. In English it is said infinite regression. Okay. Then we can say that if the consciousness, there is no other drashta for this consciousness, okay, fine. But they come up with another argument, or this kind of doubts can arise from ourselves. What doubt? Okay, if you say that we have to stop at some point and say that this is the first consciousness, which doesn't become drishya for another consciousness. Okay, fine. But can this consciousness not know itself? Listen this carefully. We are discussing very subtle points because these are the questions which arise in our mind. And let me make it very clear that what we are talking about here is about I. We are talking about I. We are looking into the nature of the I. When we talk about consciousness, this consciousness is not somewhere, someplace elsewhere. This consciousness is my very nature. This Sakshi, we are discussing about Sakshi consciousness with the help of the scriptures. And in that respect, we are scrutinizing different questions that can arise. So, okay, it has been established that we stop at some point that Sakshi is drashta only and doesn't become drishya for any other drashta, just as the eyes became drashta for the mind, eyes became drishya for the mind, and mind became drishya for consciousness. Eyes which were drashta with reference to objects outside became drishya for the mind. Mind which is drashta for the eyes becomes drishya for consciousness. So, this consciousness also can become drishya for another consciousness, and that can lead to, if we pursue that line, that will lead to anavastha dosha. So, we stopped at that point that no, Sakshi is drashta only. It never becomes drishya. But then another question can arise, another doubt that can arise. Okay, in that case, maybe this drashta, which is not drishya for anyone else, but this drashta, seer, can know itself. It knows itself. This is a point which with the Buddhists they bring out this point, that maybe they come up with this argument that maybe this drashta, that is consciousness, knows itself, which means the consciousness itself is the subject and it itself becomes object. Knowing itself means what? The knower also is consciousness and what is known is also consciousness. Is that possible? The same, and can you tell me, you think over that, can the same entity become drashta as well as drashya? Consciousness becomes the subject and sees consciousness, its own self, which is the object. So it means that the same entity is becoming subject as well as object. Now this will lead to another defect, logical defect. What is that? Karta karma virodha, kartru karma virodha, which means that the same entity cannot become the subject as well as the object. Why? Let me tell you why. Because what has been the rule? That which is drashya is always jadam. That which is seen is always inert, jada. So, if consciousness, one part of consciousness becomes the drashta and another part of consciousness becomes drashya, then what will happen? What will happen? The part which is seen, the part of the consciousness which is seen becomes jadam, because yad drishyam tad jadam, whatever is seen by another light is jada. Why? Because it cannot illumine itself, and that is why it needs some other entity to illuminate. So, if you say, they come up with the argument swayam samvedyatvam, which means that maybe consciousness sees itself. The one part of the consciousness becomes karta and another part becomes karma. Karma means object. So they assume that in the same consciousness there are these two. Which two? Subject and object. One part is the subject and the other part is the object. The subject part is the drashta and it cognizes or objectifies the other part. But this means that consciousness becomes jadam. The part which is cognized becomes jadam, because one part sees the other part. So that part which is